September 1, 1939. At 4:45 in the morning, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish fortress of Westerplatte. With those thunderous blasts echoing across the Baltic Sea, the world was thrust into the most devastating conflict in human history. This was not merely an invasion, it was the moment when 20 years of uneasy peace shattered, and darkness descended upon Europe once again. Poland, a nation that had only recently reclaimed its independence after more than a century of foreign domination, would become the first battleground of World War II. But this was no random act of aggression. The invasion of Poland was the culmination of years of careful planning, political maneuvering, and the dangerous ambitions of two totalitarian regimes that would tear the country apart from both sides. To understand the tragedy of 1939, we must first journey back to 1918. When the Great War ended, Poland emerged from the ashes of three fallen empires: German, Austrian, and Russian. For the first time in 123 years, Poland was free. The Polish people, led by the legendary Marshal Józef Pilsudski, had fought fiercely for this independence, and they treasured it deeply. But Poland's rebirth came with a price. The new nation found itself squeezed between two resentful giants: Germany, humiliated by defeat and stripped of territory by the Treaty of Versailles, and the Soviet Union, still reeling from revolution and civil war. Both harbored deep grievances against the Polish state that now separated them. The 1920s and early 30s brought relative stability, but storm clouds were gathering. In Germany, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party rose to power, preaching a dangerous ideology of territorial expansion and German supremacy. Hitler made no secret of his contempt for Poland and its people. In his warped vision, Poles were inferior occupiers of rightful German territory. The Polish Corridor, which gave Poland access to the sea but divided Germany in two, became a particular obsession for the Nazi leader. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin was consolidating his brutal dictatorship. Though officially neutral toward Poland, Stalin never forgot the Polish victory in the Polish-Soviet War of 1920, which had thwarted Bolshevik dreams of spreading revolution westward into Europe. By 1939, Hitler had already shown his hand. Austria had been absorbed into the German Reich. Czechoslovakia had been dismembered, first through the Munich Agreement, then through outright occupation. Each time, Britain and France had chosen appeasement over confrontation, hoping to satisfy Hitler's appetite for territory. But Hitler was insatiable. Poland, however, was different. Unlike Austria or Czechoslovakia, Poland had powerful allies. Britain and France had guaranteed Polish independence, promising to come to Poland's aid if attacked. The Polish government, led by Foreign Minister Józef Beck, refused Hitler's demands for the return of Danzig and the Polish Corridor. They had learned the lesson of Munich: appeasement only emboldened the aggressor. But as summer turned to autumn in 1939, the diplomatic situation took a shocking turn. On August 23, the world was stunned by news of the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. Hitler and Stalin, supposedly mortal enemies, had signed a treaty of friendship. More ominously, they had secretly agreed to divide Poland between themselves. The Polish state, which had fought so hard for independence, was to be wiped from the map once again. The German war machine that thundered across the Polish border was unlike anything the world had ever seen. This was Blitzkrieg, lightning war. 62 divisions, including 6 armored and 4 motorized, supported by overwhelming air power, crashed into Poland with devastating effect. The Luftwaffe, with over 2,000 aircraft, dominated the skies, bombing airfields, railway junctions, and cities with ruthless efficiency. The Polish military, brave but hopelessly outgunned, fought with extraordinary courage against impossible odds. Polish cavalry, in scenes both heroic and heartbreaking, charged German tanks with sabers drawn. The myth would later spread that they believed their weapons could penetrate German armor, but this was Nazi propaganda designed to mock Polish bravery. These men knew they faced death, but they charged anyway, buying precious time for their retreating comrades. At Westerplatte, fewer than 200 Polish soldiers held out against overwhelming German forces for 7 days, becoming a symbol of Polish resistance. At the Siege of Warsaw, civilians joined soldiers in a desperate defense of their capital, fighting house by house, street by street, as German bombs rained down upon them. But courage alone could not stop the German juggernaut. Polish forces, organized for a defensive war against a single enemy, were overwhelmed by the speed and coordination of the German assault. Ancient fortifications crumbled before modern artillery. Communications broke down as German bombers destroyed command posts and telephone lines. Within days, the Polish Air Force was virtually eliminated. As if Poland's suffering were not complete enough, September 17 brought fresh horror. Soviet forces, over 500,000 strong, poured across Poland's eastern border. This was the final blow, the betrayal that made Polish defeat inevitable. The Polish military, already stretched to breaking point against the German advance from the west, now faced a war on two fronts. Stalin's justification for this naked aggression was as cynical as it was false. The Soviet Union, he claimed, was merely protecting the Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities in eastern Poland from the chaos of war. In reality, this was the execution of the secret protocol of the Nazi-Soviet pact, the carving up of Poland between two totalitarian powers. The Soviet invasion shattered any remaining hope of organized Polish resistance. Forces that had been fighting their way eastward, hoping to establish new defensive lines, found themselves trapped between two advancing armies. Some Polish units, believing the Soviets might be allies against Germany, laid down their arms, only to find themselves prisoners of a different but equally ruthless regime. The meeting of German and Soviet forces at Brest-Litovsk on September 22 symbolized Poland's tragedy. The same city where Germany had dictated terms to revolutionary Russia in 1918 now witnessed the destruction of the country that lay between them. As Polish resistance crumbled, the world watched in horror and indecision. Britain and France, true to their guarantees, declared war on Germany on September 3. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's voice, heavy with the weight of history, announced over the radio that Britain was now at war. But this declaration, though morally necessary, could not save Poland. The Western Allies, despite their promises, were militarily unprepared to help. France, with the largest army in Europe, launched only a limited offensive in the Saarland before quickly retreating behind the Maginot Line. Britain, separated by sea and lacking a large army, could offer little immediate assistance. The Royal Air Force dropped leaflets over Germany, a gesture so futile it was later mocked as the Confetti War. Poland's other neighbors watched nervously from the sidelines. Romania, Hungary, and Lithuania, themselves vulnerable to German and Soviet pressure, dared not risk their own survival for Poland's sake. The Baltic states, sensing their own doom, scrambled to accommodate Soviet demands. Across Europe, smaller nations realized that the international order established after the Great War was crumbling. By early October, organized Polish resistance had collapsed. President Ignacy Mościcki and the government fled into exile, first to Romania, then to France, and finally to Britain, where they would continue the fight from abroad. Warsaw, pounded by constant bombing and artillery, surrendered on September 28 after a siege that reduced much of the city to rubble. The German and Soviet occupations that followed were exercises in calculated brutality. The Nazis, viewing Poles as inferior, implemented policies designed to destroy Polish culture and eliminate the educated classes. The Soviet NKVD, Stalin's secret police, was equally ruthless in its own way, deporting hundreds of thousands of Poles to the gulags of Siberia and executing thousands of Polish officers and intellectuals. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Poland's destruction was its clinical precision. This was not the chaotic aftermath of battle, but a carefully planned elimination of Polish statehood. Street signs were changed, Polish books were burned, schools were closed, and speaking Polish in public became dangerous. The occupiers sought not just to rule Poland, but to erase it entirely from history. The invasion of Poland lasted only 35 days, but its consequences would echo for decades. In those 5 weeks, the world had glimpsed the true face of 20th-century warfare, total, mechanized, and merciless. The blitzkrieg tactics pioneered in Poland would soon terrorize France, Yugoslavia, and the Soviet Union itself. More profoundly, Poland's agony marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The illusion that aggression could be contained through negotiation and compromise died in the rubble of Warsaw. The world had learned, too late, that some evils cannot be appeased, only defeated. For 6 long years, the Polish flag would fly only in exile, carried by Polish pilots in the Battle of Britain, by Polish soldiers at Monte Cassino, and by the remnants of the Home Army fighting in the shadows of occupied Warsaw. Their sacrifice, and the sacrifice of millions of their countrymen, would not be in vain. The spark ignited in September 1939 would eventually consume the very regimes that lit it. The invasion of Poland was indeed the beginning of World War II, but it was more than that. It was the moment when humanity stared into an abyss of its own making, and learned that freedom, once lost, must be won back with blood, courage, and unshakable determination. The Polish September would be remembered not just as the start of the world's greatest war, but as a testament to the price of civilization itself.